The train whistle cut through the February air like a rusted blade, announcing the arrival of the 447 from Kansas City. Lila Donovan pressed her gloved fingers against the frost-covered window, watching the wooden buildings of Dustwood, Wyoming, emerge from the afternoon haze. Her breath fogged the glass, and she wiped it clean with the edge of her traveling shawl, careful not to disturb the letter tucked safely in her coat pocket. 29 winters had passed over her life, each one colder than the last. But this winter would be different. Harold Wexler had promised as much in his carefully penned words, each line speaking of new beginnings and a small ranch that needed a woman's touch. She'd read that letter so many times the paper had grown soft at the creases, the ink slightly smudged where her tears had fallen that first night after receiving it. "End of the line, miss," the conductor called, his voice carrying the weariness of 1,000 miles. "Dustwood Station." The woman beside her, who'd barely spoken since Cheyenne, suddenly gripped Lila's wrist. Her weathered face held the kind of knowing that came from hard-learned lessons. "People say all sorts of things in letters," she murmured, her pale eyes searching Lila's face. "Written words can paint prettier pictures than what's real." Lila gently pulled her hand free, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I appreciate your concern, ma'am, but Mr. Wexler has been nothing but honest in his correspondence." The older woman's gaze lingered on the left side of Lila's face, where the scar ran from temple to jaw, a souvenir from a childhood accident involving her father's plow horse. Most folks tried not to stare. This woman didn't bother with such courtesy. "Honest on paper, maybe," she said, gathering her worn carpet bag. "But meeting face to face, that's when truth shows itself." The train shuddered to a stop, steam hissing like an angry cat. Lila stood, her legs stiff from the long journey, and retrieved her single trunk from the overhead rack. Everything she owned in the world fit inside that battered case: 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, a sewing kit, and the hope that somewhere in this frontier town, a man named Harold Wexler was waiting to make her his wife. The platform stretched before her, rough planks dark with old snow and mud. A few scattered souls moved about their business, collars turned up against the wind that swept down from the mountains. The station house, if it could be called that, was little more than a shed with a crooked sign reading Dustwood in fading letters. And it was empty. Lila set her trunk down, the thud echoing in the late afternoon quiet. She scanned the street beyond the platform, a general store, a saloon already glowing with lamplight, a church steeple rising like a finger pointing at the gray sky. But no Harold Wexler. The wind picked up, driving ice crystals against her cheek. She pulled her shawl tighter, the wool rough against her chin. Perhaps he was delayed. Ranch work didn't pause for weather or arriving trains. "You, Lila Donovan." She turned to find a man standing near the station house door. He was shorter than she'd imagined, with thinning hair the color of old hay and a face that seemed permanently pinched, as if he'd bitten into something sour years ago and never quite recovered. But it was his eyes that made her stomach tighten. They moved over her like she was livestock at auction. "Mr. Wexler." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of tobacco and something else, disappointment, perhaps. His gaze fixed on the left side of her face, and his expression shifted from anticipation to something harder. "You didn't mention the scar," he said flatly. The words hit her like a physical blow, but she kept her spine straight. "I didn't think it relevant to my character or my ability to keep house." "Didn't think it relevant?" His laugh was short and bitter. "A man has a right to know what he's getting." "What he's getting," Lila repeated slowly, "is a woman who can cook, clean, mend, and manage a household. A woman who's worked since she was 12 and never complained. That's what you're getting, Mr. Wexler." He shook his head, already backing away. "That's not what I agreed to. The agency said you were pleasant to look at. They said—" He stopped, his face flushing. I can't bring you home like that. What would people say? What would my mother say? Your mother? Lila's voice rose slightly. Your letters never mentioned... Don't matter now. He was already turning away. There's a boarding house on 3rd Street. Mrs. Adelaide runs it. You can stay there tonight. Figure out your plans. The next train east comes through on Thursday. And just like that, he was gone, his boots making sharp sounds on the frozen ground as he hurried away, leaving her standing alone on the platform with her trunk and her shattered expectations. Laughter drifted from the saloon across the street, harsh, male laughter that seemed to mock her situation. A few people had stopped to watch the exchange, their faces showing varying degrees of curiosity and pity. One woman whispered something to her companion, and they both looked away when Lila met their eyes. She stood there for a long moment, letting the reality settle over her like the falling snow. She'd spent her last dollar on the train ticket. She'd left behind a position as a seamstress in Kansas City, poor paying but steady for the promise of a home and a husband. Now she had neither. The smart thing would be to panic, to cry, to beg someone, anyone, for help. Instead, Lila picked up her trunk, testing its weight. Heavier than she remembered, but manageable. She stepped off the platform onto the muddy street, her boots sinking slightly into the half-frozen muck. If there was a boarding house on 3rd Street, she'd find it. If Mrs. Adelaide would give her a room on credit, she'd take it. If not, well, she'd survived worse than a broken promise and a cold night in a strange town. The mud sucked at her boots with each step, as if the very earth was trying to hold her back. But Lila Donovan had come too far to stop now. She'd crossed half a territory on the word of a man who couldn't look past a scar to see the woman beneath. That was his failing, not hers. Behind her, the train whistle sounded again, a mournful cry as it prepared to continue its journey west. For a moment, just a moment, she considered running back, begging the conductor to let her ride to the next town, the next chance, the next disappointment. But her feet kept moving forward, carrying her deeper into Dustwood, where the buildings pressed close and the mountains loomed like stern parents in the distance. Somewhere in this town, there had to be a place for a woman with strong hands and a scarred face. There had to be. The wind whispered otherwise. But Lila had learned long ago not to trust whispers. They lied as easily as men with pen and paper, promising things they had no intention of delivering. 3rd Street wasn't hard to find. Dustwood wasn't big enough to get lost in. The boarding house sat between a bootmaker's shop and a small cafe, its white paint peeling like old skin. A sign in the window read, "Rooms, weekly rates, no credit." Lila stood before the door, her trunk growing heavier by the moment, and knocked. The door remained closed. Through the lace curtains, Lila could see the warm glow of lamplight, hear the muffled sounds of life within. She knocked again, harder this time, her knuckles stinging from the cold. No answer. She turned from the boarding house, her trunk weighing heavier with each step back toward the main street. The "no credit" sign burned in her mind like a brand. Without money, without connections, without even the man who'd promised her a future, she was nothing more than another piece of driftwood washed up on Dustwood's muddy shores. The street stretched before her, rutted and treacherous in the fading light. Horse droppings steamed in the cold air, and she stepped carefully around them, trying to preserve what dignity remained to her. People passed, merchants closing shops, working men heading to the saloon, women hurrying home before full dark. Some glanced at her with curiosity, their eyes inevitably drawn to the scar before sliding away. Others looked through her as if she were invisible. Near the general store, a group of women stood talking, their voices carrying on the wind. Saw the whole thing at the station. One was saying, "Harold took one look and practically ran. Can't say I blame him, though, that mark on her face." Lila kept walking, her chin lifted despite the weight threatening to bow her shoulders. Let them talk. She'd heard worse in Kansas City. where the factory girls had whispered behind their hands whenever she passed. The mud grew deeper as she moved toward the less prosperous end of town. Her boots, already worn from years of use, provided little protection against the cold seeping through. Each step required effort, the sticky earth grabbing at her heels as if trying to claim her for its own. A child darted past, nearly knocking into her trunk. His mother grabbed him roughly, shooting Lila a look that was part apology, part wariness. "Stay close, William," she hissed, pulling the boy away as if Lila's misfortune might be contagious. The saloon's light grew brighter as darkness settled over Dustwood. Music spilled out a badly tuned piano and voices raised in song. She gave it a wide berth, knowing that a woman alone near such a place invited assumptions she couldn't afford. But even from across the street, she could hear the laughter, smell the warmth and whiskey, feel the pull of somewhere, anywhere, that offered respite from the cold. Her arms burned from carrying the trunk. She set it down for a moment, flexing her fingers to restore feeling. The temperature was dropping fast now that the sun had disappeared behind the mountains. If she didn't find shelter soon, "Ma'am shouldn't be out here alone." The voice came from behind her, deep and measured. She turned to see a man sitting atop a black horse, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He was tall, she could tell, even with him mounted, and his coat spoke of hard use but good care. Leather gloves covered his hands where they rested easy on the saddle horn. "I'm managing," she said, bending to lift her trunk again. "Can see that." There was something in his voice, not mockery, but observation. "Also can see you're about done in. That trunk's not getting any lighter. And 3rd Street's boarding house isn't taking anyone without cash up front. How did you—" "Small town." He shifted in the saddle, leather creaking. Everybody knows everybody else's business before they've finished thinking it. A gust of wind cut through her shawl, and she couldn't suppress a shiver. The stranger noticed she could tell by the slight tilt of his head. "There's a porch with soup and fire at Miss Adelaide's place," he said. "Other end of 3rd Street from where you were knocking. She's got a soft spot for women who've been left standing in the cold. You coming?" Pride warred with practicality. She didn't know this man, didn't trust the kindness of strangers in a town that had already shown its true face. But her feet were numb, her hands raw, and the trunk seemed to have doubled in weight. "I have no money," she said plainly. "If your Miss Adelaide is running a charity, then I'll gladly accept. If not—" "Adelaide doesn't run charity." He swung down from the horse in one smooth motion, and she realized he was even taller than she'd thought. "But she knows what it's like to be judged for things that don't matter. Suspects you might know something about that, too." His eyes, she could see them now in the light spilling from a nearby window, were the color of strong coffee. They looked at her straight on, taking in the scar without flinching, without that familiar mix of pity and revulsion she'd grown accustomed to. "Why?" The word came out before she could stop it. "Why would you help me?" He reached for her trunk, pausing with his hands near the handle. "May I?" She nodded, too tired to protest. He lifted it easily, muscles moving under his coat. "Town's not always kind," he said, starting to walk. His horse followed without being led, clearly used to the routine. "But there's good people mixed in with the rest. Adelaide's one of them. As for why—" He glanced at her, a hint of something memory, perhaps crossing his features. "Let's say I know what it's like to be measured by the wrong things." Lila fell into step beside him, her shorter legs working to match his stride. The mud seemed less grabbing now, though perhaps that was just the relief of not carrying the trunk. "You saw what happened at the station," she said. It wasn't a question. "Saw enough?" His jaw tightened. "Harold Wexler's a fool, but that's nothing new. Man's been looking for a wife to please his mother for 3 years now. You're the 4th one he sent away." "The 4th?" Lila felt a bitter laugh building in her throat. "He might have mentioned that in his letters." "Might have mentioned his mother runs his house like a general runs an army. 2, you had a narrow escape. though I doubt it feels that way right now. They turned down a side street she hadn't noticed before. The houses here were smaller but neater, with actual boardwalks instead of just mud. Light glowed warmly from windows, and she caught the scent of baking bread. "What's your name?" she asked. "Eli Rhodes." He shifted the trunk to his other hand as if it weighed nothing. "Run the horse ranch west of town, and you're Lila Donovan from Kansas City. Unless Harold got that wrong too." "He got that right, at least." She pulled her shawl tighter. "Though I'm starting to wonder if anything else in those letters was true." "Probably not. Harold's got a relationship with truth like a cat's got with water, avoids it unless absolutely necessary." Despite everything, Lila felt her lips twitch toward a smile. "You don't seem to think much of him." "Don't think of him at all, mostly." Eli stopped before a 2-story house painted butter yellow, with green shutters and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides. Smoke rose from the chimney, and through the windows, Lila could see the warm dance of firelight. "Here we are." He climbed the porch steps and set her trunk down gently before knocking on the door. Not the timid tap Lila had attempted at the other boarding house, but a solid sound that expected an answer. It came quickly. The door swung open to reveal a woman in her 50s. Steel gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, flour dusting her apron. Her face was handsome rather than pretty, with lines that suggested both laughter and sorrow in equal measure. "Eli Rhodes," she said, her voice carrying a hint of the South. "What trouble are you bringing to my door now?" "The kind that needs a bowl of soup and a warm place to think," he replied. "Mrs. Adelaide, this is Miss Lila Donovan." She had the misfortune of believing Harold Wexler's letters. Adelaide's sharp eyes took in Lila's appearance in one swift glance: the mud-stained hem, the worn coat, the trunk that contained a life's possessions, and yes, the scar. But unlike others, her expression softened rather than hardened. "Another one of Harold's victims," she said, stepping back to let them in. "Well, come on then. No sense freezing on the porch when there's fire inside." The warmth hit Lila like a physical embrace. She swayed slightly, and Eli's hand touched her elbow, steadying her without making a fuss about it. "When did you last eat?" Adelaide asked, already moving toward what must be the kitchen. Lila tried to remember. There had been some bread on the train that morning, but yesterday, I think maybe the day before. The journey was long. "Lord have mercy." Adelaide's voice carried the particular exasperation of a woman who'd seen too much foolishness in the world. "Eli, bring that trunk in before you go." "Miss Donovan, you sit yourself by that fire before you fall down." Lila found herself guided to a chair near the hearth, the heat seeping into her frozen bones. The room was simple but clean, with braided rugs on the floor and samplers on the walls. One caught her eye. "Judge not, lest ye be judged." The stitching was expert, each letter perfectly formed. Eli set her trunk near the stairs, then turned to go. At the door, he paused, looking back at her. "You stood tall out there," he said quietly, "in the mud, with folks staring and whispering. Not everyone can do that." Then he was gone, leaving Lila staring at the closed door, wondering why a stranger's approval should matter when the man who'd promised to marry her had rejected her without a second thought. Adelaide returned with a bowl of soup that smelled like heaven and a thick slice of bread. "Eat," she commanded. "We'll talk about the rest after you've got something in your stomach." The soup was rich with vegetables and chunks of beef, the bread still warm from the oven. Lila ate slowly, savoring each bite, while Adelaide busied herself with some mending, giving her guest time to simply exist without questions or judgment. Outside, she could hear Eli's horse moving away, the sound fading into the night. Inside, the fire crackled. The clock on the mantel ticked steadily, and for the first time since leaving Kansas City, Lila felt something that might have been hope. She'd thought her first night in Dustwood would end with her in Harold Wexler's home, starting a new life as a rancher's wife. Instead, She sat in a stranger's kitchen, her dreams as muddy as her boots, her future as uncertain as the weather. But she was warm. She was fed, and she had not fallen, despite the weight of disappointment and the grabbing mud. That was something. Maybe it was even enough. The soup bowl sat empty between them, the last crumbs of bread long gone. Adelaide had moved from her mending to pour tea, the china cups delicate in her work-worn hands. The clock showed past 9, and the house had settled into that particular quiet that comes when the day's work is done. "Sugar?" Adelaide asked, though she was already adding 2 lumps to Lila's cup. "Thank you." Lila wrapped her fingers around the warm porcelain, letting the heat seep into her still cold hands. "For everything, the soup, the kindness. I don't know how I'll repay you." "Didn't ask you to." Adelaide settled back in her chair, her own cup cradled close. "Though, if you're the type that needs to square accounts, we'll figure something out. Always work to be done in a house this size." They sat in companionable silence for a moment. The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Somewhere in the walls, the house creaked and settled, the sound of old wood adjusting to the night's cold. He wasn't the first to turn away. Lila found herself saying, the words came unbidden, surprising her. She hadn't meant to speak of it. Back in Kansas City, there were others, men who responded to my advertisement, who seemed interested until they met me. Harold was just the first who got so far as to buy my train ticket. Adelaide sipped her tea, saying nothing, but her silence was inviting rather than cold. "I got the scar when I was 7, Lila continued, her fingers unconsciously moving toward her face before she caught herself. "My father's plow horse spooked. I was standing too close, got caught by a hoof. The doctor said I was lucky not to lose an eye." She laughed, short and bitter. "Lucky, that's what they called it." "Were you?" Adelaide asked quietly. "Lucky." Lila considered this. I can see, I can work. So yes, I suppose I was lucky. Just not in the way that matters to most men looking for a wife." Adelaide set down her cup with a decisive click. "Going to tell you something, and I want you to listen close. My husband, my late husband, God rest him, he left me, not because of a scar, but because I couldn't give him children. 5 years we tried, 5 years of hope and disappointment, and then one morning I woke to find him gone, left a note saying he'd found someone who could give him sons." The fire crackled between them, filling the silence. "Spent months thinking I was broken," Adelaide continued. "Worthless. What good's a woman who can't do the one thing God designed her for? That's what I asked myself every morning, every night." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "You know what I learned." Lila shook her head. "I learned that men who measure a woman's worth by one thing, whether it's her face or her womb or her dowry, those aren't men worth having. My Samuel taught me that." Samuel. "My second husband." Adelaide's face softened. "Found me crying in the church one Sunday, about 2 years after James left, handed me his handkerchief and said, 'Ma'am, anyone who made you cry that hard is a fool, and I don't much care for fools.' We were married 6 months later." "Where is he now?" "Buried these 10 years come spring. Mining accident." Adelaide's voice stayed steady, but her hands tightened on her cup. "We had 12 good years together. No children turned out. It was God's will, not my failing. But we had love, respect, and a partnership that meant something. That's worth more than all the sons in Wyoming." She stood, gathering the dishes with practiced efficiency. "Scars don't scare good men, Miss Donovan. They just help you recognize the bad ones faster." Lila helped clear the table, her movements automatic from years of keeping house. "That's a nice thought, Mrs. Adelaide, but—" "Just Adelaide. And it's not a thought, it's truth. Eli Rhodes saw your scar tonight. Did he stare? Did he turn away?" "No, but he was just being kind." "Eli Rhodes doesn't do just anything." Adelaide pumped water into the wash basin, her movements sharp. That man's got more reason than most to judge by appearances, and he chooses not to. You might think on that. They washed dishes in companionable quiet, Lila washing while Adelaide dried and put away. It was domestic, familiar, and strangely comforting after the chaos of the day. The kitchen was warm and well-ordered, with herbs hanging from the rafters and preserves lined up on shelves like soldiers. "I have a room upstairs," Adelaide said when the last plate was shelved. "It's small, but it's clean and the roof doesn't leak. Board's $2 a week, but seeing as you're short on funds, we'll work out a trade. You any good with that needle of yours?" "I worked as a seamstress for 8 years. Lila replied, "Mainly piecework for the factories. But I can do fine work too. Embroidery, alterations, even some tailoring." "Good. I've got a pile of mending that's been glaring at me for months, and orders for curtains I've been putting off. You help me with those. We'll call it even for a while." "Fair?" "More than fair." Lila felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "Thank you." Adelaide waved this away. "Come on, then. Let's get you settled." The room was indeed small, barely large enough for a bed, washstand, and chair, but it was clean as promised, with a faded quilt on the bed and white curtains at the window. Adelaide lit the lamp on the washstand, the warm glow pushing back the shadows. Chamber pots under the bed, water pitchers filled fresh daily. Breakfast is at 6, dinner at noon, supper at 6 in the evening. I don't hold with drinking or men visitors upstairs, but otherwise you're free to come and go as you please. "It's perfect," Lila said, meaning it. After the cold platform and muddy streets, the simple room looked like a palace. Adelaide paused at the door. "One more thing. This town, it's small, set in its ways. People will talk about what happened today. Some will be cruel because that's their nature, but others will judge you by your actions, not your appearance. Give them a chance to see who you are." After she left, Lila sat on the edge of the bed, finally alone with her thoughts. The day felt like a week, the train journey, Harold's rejection, the struggle through the mud, Eli's unexpected kindness, Adelaide's straightforward wisdom. She should feel defeated, she supposed. Her plans had crumbled. Her future was uncertain, and she was further from home than she'd ever been. Instead, she felt, not hopeful exactly, but not hopeless either. She had a roof over her head, work for her hands, and at least 2 people in this town who'd looked past her scar to see the woman beneath. She unpacked slowly, hanging her 2 dresses on the pegs behind the door, placing her mother's Bible on the small table by the bed. Her sewing kit went on the chair, its familiar weight comforting. Everything she owned fit easily in the small space, with room to spare. From her window, she could see the main street of Dustwood, quiet now except for the saloon's continued revelry. Somewhere out there, Harold Wexler was probably sitting by his own fire, congratulating himself on avoiding a mistake. Let him. Adelaide was right. His rejection said more about him than it did about her. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Donovan brought you an extra blanket. Nights get cold here." Lila opened the door to find Adelaide holding a thick wool blanket and something else, a piece of cornbread wrapped in a napkin. "Thought you might want something sweet before bed," the older woman said, almost shyly. "My mother's recipe. Always helped me sleep when troubles were heavy." "Adelaide." Lila took the offerings, her eyes stinging. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "Because someone was kind to me once, when I needed it most." Adelaide patted her shoulder, the touch brief but warm. "We women need to look after each other. Lord knows, the world won't do it for us. Now get some rest. Tomorrow's a new day, and there's work to be done." After she left, Lila sat in the lamplight, eating cornbread that tasted of honey and home. The room was small, the bed narrow, the future uncertain. But for the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't feel alone. Outside her window, snow began to fall, soft and silent, covering the mud and mess of the day with a clean white blanket. Tomorrow, She'd face whatever came, the stares, the whispers, the challenge of building a life from nothing but determination and thread. But tonight, she was warm, she was safe, and in a boarding house run by a woman who understood scars that didn't show. Lila Donovan finally allowed herself to hope that Harold Wexler's rejection might have been not an ending, but a beginning. She blew out the lamp and lay down fully dressed, too tired to change. The last thing she remembered before sleep claimed her was Adelaide's voice, steady and sure. Scars don't scare good men. Maybe, just maybe, there were good men to be found, even in a muddy little town like Dustwood. The thought followed her into dreams where scarred faces meant nothing, and kindness came without condition. Morning came with the sound of Adelaide's rooster and the smell of coffee brewing strong enough to wake the dead. Lila dressed quickly in her better dress, the brown wool that didn't show wear as badly as the blue, and pinned her hair with careful hands. The mirror above the washstand was small and spotted with age, but it showed her what the world would see: a woman with steady eyes, capable hands, and a scar that caught the light like a river on a map. Downstairs, Adelaide was already at work, kneading bread dough with the rhythm of long practice. "Coffee's hot," she said without looking up. "Eggs and bacon on the stove. Help yourself." Lila ate quietly, watching the older woman work. Adelaide's hands were sure and strong, pushing and folding the dough with an economy of motion that spoke of countless mornings just like this one. "I thought I'd set up in the front parlor, if that's acceptable," Lila said when she'd finished eating. "The light's good there, and customers can come to the front door." Adelaide nodded, giving the dough a final pat. "Smart thinking. There's a small table you can use, and a chair by the window. I'll spread word that you're taking in sewing." By mid-morning, Lila had transformed a corner of Adelaide's front parlor into a makeshift shop. Her sewing kit lay open on the table, scissors gleaming, thread arranged by color. The fabric pieces she'd brought from Kansas City were spread out like promises, a length of good cotton, some wool scraps, a precious yard of silk she'd been saving for something special. She'd barely settled in when the front door opened, letting in a gust of cold air and a small girl with pigtails the color of wheat. "Mama says, are you the sewing lady?" the child asked, eyes wide as coins. "I am," Lila replied, smiling. "How can I help you?" The girl thrust forward a bundle of blue calico. "My Sunday dress tore. Mama says, can you fix it? And how much?" Lila examined the dress, a simple tear along the seam, easily mended. 10 cents, she said, "and I can have it ready by tomorrow." "Only 10 cents. The girl's face lit up. "Mama gave me a quarter in case it was more." She dug in her pocket, producing the coin. "She said to ask nice and not stare." "Stare at what?" Lila asked gently, though she knew. The girl's cheeks went pink. At your face, but I wasn't staring, I was just looking a regular amount." "That's all right. Looking a regular amount is perfectly fine." Lila took the quarter and counted out 15 cents change. "What's your name?" "Emma. Emma Patterson. We live above the general store." She accepted her change with careful hands. "Mama wanted to come herself, but Emma squirmed. She said she had to mind the store, but really I think she was scared of what people would say. About, Lila kept her voice light. "About Harold Wexler leaving me at the station?" "Yes, I imagine that's gotten around." "Billy Thompson said his mama said you must have done something terrible for a man to take one look and run away." Emma's honesty was brutal in its innocence. "But I don't think you look terrible. You look like a regular lady, just with a mark." "Thank you, Emma. That's very kind. Is it true you came all the way from Kansas City, on the train by yourself?" "It's true." "That's brave." Emma clutched her torn dress. "I wouldn't be brave enough to go that far alone. Were you scared?" "Sometimes," Lila admitted. "But being scared doesn't mean you can't do things. It just means you do them anyway." Emma considered this with a seriousness only a child could muster. "I'll tell Mama you're nice. Maybe she'll come next time herself." After the girl left, Lila set to work on the simple repair. Her fingers moved automatically, the needle flashing in the morning light. This was what she knew, what she was good at. Fabric didn't care about scars or broken promises. Thread didn't judge. Word spread faster than she'd expected. By noon, 2 more customers had come, an elderly woman needing her coat hem raised, and a young mother with a pile of mending. Both were cautious at first, eyes darting to Lila's scar and away, but they relaxed when she proved competent and professional. "Heard you worked in Kansas City," the young mother said, bouncing a baby on her hip. "In the factories." "Yes, for 8 years, but I prefer this working with individual pieces, taking time to do things properly. My sister worked in a factory back east, said the hours were terrible and the pay worse." Both true. Lila agreed, carefully sorting through the mending. "But it was honest work, and it taught me speed and precision." The afternoon brought a surprise rumors, carried by the whispers of passing townspeople. "That's her," she heard through the window. "The one Harold rejected." "Did you see the scar? No wonder he—" Still, seems cruel to leave a woman standing in the cold. His mother would never have accepted her. You know how particular Mrs. Wexler is. Lila forced herself to focus on her work, but the words stung like winter wind through thin cloth. She was contemplating closing the curtains when the door opened again. A woman entered, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of bearing that suggested money and position. Her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate style, and her dress was finer than anything Lila had seen in Dustwood so far. "You're the seamstress," the woman said. It wasn't a question. "I am. How may I help you?" The woman studied her with sharp gray eyes, taking in every detail from Lila's mended cuffs to the infamous scar. "I'm Mrs. Catherine Morrison. My husband owns the bank." Lila waited, recognizing the type. Women like Mrs. Morrison didn't come to small sewing corners unless they wanted something specific. "I need a dress altered." "Mrs. Morrison finally said, "It's from Denver, and the fit isn't quite right. Are you capable of working with fine materials?" "I am." Lila kept her voice steady. "I'd need to see the dress to give you a proper estimate." "Mrs." Morrison hesitated. Then, "It's silk, imported. If you damage it—" "I won't." Something in Lila's certainty seemed to decide the matter. "Very well. I'll send my girl around with it tomorrow. If you do good work, there could be more. I have extensive wardrobe needs." She turned to go, then paused at the door. "A word of advice, Miss Donovan. This town thrives on gossip. Give them something else to talk about besides your misfortune, and they'll move on soon enough." After she left, Adelaide appeared with tea and knowing look. "Catherine Morrison. That's a coup. She usually sends everything to Denver." "She's testing me," Lila said. "If I fail with her dress, she'll make sure everyone knows." "Then don't fail." Adelaide's smile was sharp. "Show these hens what Kansas City taught you." The day wore on, bringing a steady trickle of small jobs. By evening, Lila had a respectable pile of work and the promise of more. Her fingers ached from the unaccustomed labor factory work used different muscles, but it was a good ache. Satisfying. She was closing up her sewing kit when the door opened one last time. She looked up, expecting another customer, and found Eli Rhodes instead. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand, snow dusting his shoulders. "Evening. Miss Donovan. Adelaide said I'd find you here." Mr. Rhodes." She was suddenly conscious of her tired appearance, the threads clinging to her dress. "How can I help you?" He stepped inside, seeming to fill the small parlor with his presence. "Heard you were taking in work. I've got a coat needs some attention, the lining's torn, and there's—" He gestured vaguely. "Well, It's seen better days. I'd be happy to look at it. He shrugged out of the coat, revealing a leather vest over a work shirt that had seen careful mending. The coat itself was good quality but hard used, with tears in the silk lining and wear at the cuffs and collar. Lila examined it with professional eyes. I can repair the lining, reinforce the stress points. Maybe add a wool interlining if you'd like. It would make it warmer for winter work. That'd be fine. He watched her hands as she assessed the damage. What made you mention the wool lining? The wear patterns. You spent a lot of time outdoors in the cold, probably on horseback. The original lining isn't warm enough for Wyoming winters. He smiled then, the expression transforming his serious face. Observant. Most people just see a torn coat. Clothes tell stories, Lila said, folding the coat carefully. This one says you work hard but take care of what's yours. The mending on your shirt, did you do it yourself? My sister, before she married and moved to California. Been making do since then. I can have this ready in 3 days. $2 for the repairs and lining. Fair enough. He pulled out the money, but hesitated before handing it over. Can I ask you something? Lila braced herself. Here it would come questions about Harold, about the scar, about why she'd traveled so far for nothing. Did you mean what you said to that little girl about doing things even when you're scared? The question surprised her. You heard that? Window was open. I was tying up my horse. He looked almost embarrassed. Didn't mean to eavesdrop, but, well, it struck me as true. Wise, even. I meant it, Lila said softly, though I don't always manage to follow my own advice. Don't think any of us do. He handed her the money, their fingers brushing briefly. But you're here, aren't you? Setting up shop in a strange town, facing down the gossips. Seems to me you're doing just fine with the being brave part. He left before she could respond, taking his warmth and unexpected kindness with him. Lila stood holding his coat, feeling the weight of good leather and possibility. Adelaide found her there a few minutes later, still standing in the same spot. That Eli Rhodes is an interesting man, Adelaide observed, eyeing the coat in Lila's hands. He's a customer, Lila said firmly. A customer who could have taken that coat to Mr. Chen at the laundry. He does mending too. But instead, he came here. Lila had no answer for that. She carried Eli's coat upstairs with her other work, her mind turning over the day's events. Emma's innocent honesty, Mrs. Morrison's calculated risk, the townspeople's whispers, and Eli Rhodes, quoting her own words back to her with something like admiration in his voice. 3 days passed in a blur of thread and fabric. Lila's corner of Adelaide's parlor became a small hub of activity, with women coming not just for mending, but for the quiet acceptance they found there. She learned their names, their stories, the small dramas that made up life in Dustwood. Mrs. Patterson finally came herself, Emma in tow, to commission new curtains. Emma wouldn't stop talking about you, she admitted, not quite meeting Lila's eyes. Said you were kind and didn't talk down to her. Children often see clearer than adults, Lila replied. Measuring the fabric Mrs. Patterson had brought, they haven't learned yet what they're supposed to be afraid of. On the morning of the 3rd day, she put the final stitches in Eli Rhodes's coat. The new wool lining was smooth and warm, the tears invisible, the worn places reinforced with careful darning. She'd added something extra, a small inside pocket for valuables, stitched with thread the exact color of the leather so it seemed to disappear. She was wrapping the coat in brown paper when he arrived, prompt as sunrise. Mr. Rhodes, she handed him the package. I hope you'll find it satisfactory. He unwrapped it right there, running his hands over the repairs, testing the new lining. His fingers found the hidden pocket, and his eyebrows rose. I didn't ask for this, he said, fingering the neat stitching. No charge for it. I noticed you carry your money loose in your pants pocket, saw the wear marks. Thought this might be more secure. He put the coat on, moving his shoulders to test the fit. "It's better than new, thank you. Just doing my job." "No," he said quietly. "You're doing more than that." Before she could ask what he meant, he'd placed something on her work table, a piece of soft leather, buttery and supple. "Wondered if you could make something from this," he said. "Maybe a pair of gloves. My hands take a beating in winter, and the store-bought ones never fit right." Lila picked up the leather, testing its weight and texture. "This is beautiful. Where did you get it?" "Tanned it myself. It's from a deer I took last fall. Seemed a shame to waste the hide." He held out his hands. "Would you need to measure?" She fetched her measuring tape, trying to ignore the warmth that crept up her neck as she took his measurements. His hands were large, calloused from work, but gentle as he held them still for her. "Have them done in a week," she said, writing down the numbers with a hand that only trembled slightly. "No rush. And Miss Donovan." He paused at the door. "Do you ever think you deserve to stay here in Dustwood?" The question echoed his words from days before, but inverted, turned back on her like a mirror. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "I'm still deciding if Dustwood deserves me." His laugh was rich and unexpected. "Fair enough. Good day to you." After he left, Adelaide appeared like clockwork, dust rag in hand, but clearly not dusting. "That's twice now he's been by." "He's a customer?" Lila repeated, focusing on cutting a pattern for the gloves. "A customer who's asking philosophical questions and bringing you the best leather in the territory." Adelaide's smile was knowing. "That hide's worth more than he's paying you for the gloves." "Then he's overpaying. That's his business." Adelaide hummed skeptically, but left it alone. She'd learned that Lila could be as stubborn as Wyoming weather when pushed. The week passed quickly. Word of Lila's skill had spread beyond the initial curiosity seekers, even Mrs. Morrison's silk dress had been a success, earning grudging approval and a commission for 2 more alterations. "You've got good hands," Mrs. Morrison had said, counting out payment. "Steady, precise. Where did you train?" "Necessity," Lila had replied, which was true enough. And a mother who believed idle hands were the devil's workshop. She worked on Eli's gloves in the evenings. When the regular mending was done, the leather was a joy to work with, responding to every stitch like it wanted to become something beautiful. She lined them with soft flannel, added reinforcement at the stress points, and embroidered a small design on the cuffs, mountains, and stars, barely visible unless you knew to look. The afternoon she finished them. Snow was falling thick and fast. Adelaide had gone to visit a sick friend, leaving Lila alone in the house. She was wrapping the gloves when she heard horses outside, running hard. Through the window, she saw 2 men dismount. One was Eli, the other a younger man she didn't recognize. Both were covered in snow and mud, and there was an urgency to their movements that made her heart race. She opened the door before they could knock. "What's wrong?" "Need your help," Eli said, without preamble. "There's been an accident at the Hendricks place. Their girl she's cut bad, and Doc Morrison snowed in at the Bancroft Ranch. Can you come?" Lila didn't hesitate. "Let me get my sewing kit." She grabbed her supplies and her coat, following the men out into the storm. Eli lifted her onto his horse without asking, swinging up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, and she tried not to think about the solid warmth of him as they rode hard through the falling snow. The Hendricks place was chaos when they arrived. A girl of maybe 12 lay on the kitchen table, her dress soaked with blood from a gash on her arm. Her mother stood frozen, face white with fear. "Happened in the barn." "Mister," Hendricks explained rapidly. "She fell against the scythe blade." Lila pushed past her own fear, her hands steady as she examined the wound, deep but clean, missing the major vessels by luck or divine providence. "I need boiling water, clean cloth, and all the whiskey you have," she ordered, her voice carrying an authority she didn't know she possessed. They scrambled to obey. Lila cleaned the wound, her factory training in precise work serving her well. The girl Sarah whimpered but didn't scream, even when Lila had to probe for fragments of cloth. "You're brave," Lila told her, working quickly. "Braver than most grown men I've seen." "Doesn't feel brave," Sarah gasped. Brave isn't about feeling. It's about holding still when everything in you wants to run. She began stitching, her needle moving in tiny, perfect increments. "Can you do that for me?" Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face, but body still. It took 37 stitches to close the wound, each one placed with the same care Lila would have used on silk. When she finished, she wrapped the arm in clean bandages, fashioning a sling from a kitchen towel. She'll need to keep it clean and dry. Lila instructed Mrs. Hendricks, who had found her voice again. "Change the bandages daily. If you see red streaks or smell anything foul, send for the doctor immediately." "The stitches," Mrs. Hendricks said wonderingly. "They're so small, so neat. How did you—" "8 years of piecing together scraps taught me that small, careful work lasts longest." Lila packed up her supplies, exhaustion hitting her like a wall. Sarah was the brave one. I just held the needle. Outside, the storm had worsened. Eli appeared at her elbow as she stood on the porch, contemplating the wall of white. "You did good in there," he said quietly. "Real good." "I did what was needed. Not everyone can, not everyone would." He studied her face in the dim light. "Where'd you learn to stay so calm?" "Factory accidents," she said simply. "Saw plenty of them. Learned that panic never helped anyone heal." The ride back was slower, fighting through drifts that hadn't been there an hour before. Eli kept her steady on the horse, his presence a bulwark against the storm. Neither spoke, but the silence was comfortable, filled with the whisper of snow and the steady breathing of the horse. When they reached Adelaide's house, he helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Your gloves," she remembered suddenly. "They're finished. I should—" "Keep them," he said. "Consider it payment for today, though I suspect the Hendricks family owes you more than I could ever pay." "I didn't do it for payment." "I know." He touched his hat brim. "That's what makes it worth something. Do you think you deserve to stay in Dustwood now?" She looked up at him, snow catching on her eyelashes. "Why do you keep asking me that?" "Because I think you're asking yourself the same question. And because—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because I hope the answer is yes." Before she could respond, he was mounting his horse again, disappearing into the storm like a ghost. Lila stood on the porch, watching until even the hoof prints were swallowed by snow. Inside, she found Adelaide had returned, bringing the warmth of the kitchen and the comfort of routine. "Heard you play doctor today," the older woman said, handing her a cup of hot cider. "Played seamstress on skin instead of cloth," Lila corrected, sinking into a chair. "Not so different, really." "Different enough. Sarah Hendricks will carry those stitches the rest of her life. Her mother will tell everyone how you saved her girl." Adelaide sat across from her. "That's not nothing. In a small town, that's something that matters." Lila sipped her cider, thinking about Eli's questions, about Sarah's bravery, about the way the town had started to look at her differently, not just as the woman with the scar that Harold Wexler rejected, but as the seamstress with steady hands and calm presence. "Still standing?" she murmured, remembering the words she'd embroidered on that first piece for Eli. "What's that?" "Nothing, just thinking about staying." Adelaide smiled, wise and knowing. "Good. This town could use someone who stitches things together instead of tearing them apart. And speaking of stitching," she produced a bundle of fabric. "Mrs. Morrison sent over another dress. Seems you've made quite an impression." Lila took the bundle, running her fingers over the fine wool. Outside, the storm continued, but inside was warm and bright, filled with work and purpose and the growing certainty that maybe, just maybe, she'd found where she belonged. The gloves she'd made for Eli sat on her work table, wrapped and waiting. Tomorrow, she'd deliver them herself. Tonight, she'd work on Mrs. Morrison's dress and think about questions of deserving and staying and the way a man's voice could carry warmth even through a winter storm. The church social was 3 weeks coming, announced by hand-lettered posters that appeared on every corner like spring flowers. March social, dancing, refreshments, all welcome, they proclaimed. Though Lila wondered about that last part, all welcome didn't always mean what it said in small towns. She hadn't planned to go, but Adelaide had other ideas. "You'll wear your blue dress," Adelaide announced a week before, in the tone that brooked no argument. "I'll do your hair, and we'll show this town that Lila Donovan isn't hiding from anyone." "I'm not hiding," Lila protested, bent over Mrs. Morrison's latest commission. "I'm working yourself into the ground. More like, when's the last time you did something that wasn't thread and needle?" Lila couldn't answer that. The weeks since her arrival had blurred together in a comfortable routine of work and quiet evenings. She'd built a reputation, a clientele, even something approaching friendships with some of the women who came to her. But she hadn't ventured much beyond Adelaide's house and the necessary errands. "Besides," Adelaide continued, "Eli Rhodes asked particular if you were planning to attend." Lila's needle slipped, pricking her finger. "He did?" "Mm-hmm. Came by yesterday while you were delivering the Watson order. Said he hoped to see you there." Lila sucked her pricked finger, tasting copper and possibility. She'd delivered his gloves 2 weeks ago, and he'd worn them every time she'd seen him since. The small embroidered design had caught more than one person's eye, leading to 3 new commissions for similar work. The night of the social came crisp and clear. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled salt. Lila stood before her small mirror, hardly recognizing herself. Adelaide had worked magic with her hair, sweeping it up in a style that was elegant without being ostentatious. The blue dress, freshly pressed and altered to fit perfectly, made her eyes seem brighter. "You'll do," Adelaide pronounced, adding a final pin. "Now remember, head high, smile when you mean it, and don't let anyone make you feel less than you are." The church hall blazed with light and music. Fiddle and piano competed with the chatter of what seemed like half the county. Lila paused at the entrance, her courage faltering. So many faces, so many eyes that would find her scar before anything else. Miss Donovan. Eli appeared at her elbow as if conjured. He wore a clean white shirt and string tie, his hair still damp from washing. "You came." "Adelaide didn't give me much choice," she admitted. "Remind me to thank her." He offered his arm. "Would you allow me to escort you in?" She took his arm, drawing strength from the solid warmth of him. Heads turned as they entered, whispers following in their wake like foam after a ship. But with Eli beside her, the attention felt manageable rather than overwhelming. The hall had been transformed with paper lanterns and early wildflowers. Tables groaned under the weight of pies and cakes donated by the church ladies. Children darted between adults' legs, playing games that seemed to involve a great deal of shrieking and very little rule following. "Drink," Eli guided her toward the refreshment table. "Mrs. Baker makes a punch that's almost tolerable." They were halfway there when Harold Wexler materialized from the crowd. He looked exactly as Lila remembered: pinched face, thinning hair, eyes that couldn't quite decide where to rest. A woman clung to his arm, pretty in a faded sort of way, with the nervous hands that fluttered like birds. "Miss Donovan," Harold said, his voice carrying that false heartiness men use when they're uncomfortable. "I see you decided to stay in Dustwood after all." "Mr. Wexler." Lila kept her voice neutral. "Yes, I've found the town quite welcoming." His eyes flicked to Eli, then back to her scar. then away. "This is Miss Prudence Shaw. We're engaged." Miss Shaw smiled tremulously. "Harold's told me about you, how you came all the way from Kansas City, how brave." There was no malice in her voice, just the kind of innocent awkwardness that made Lila feel sorry for her. This mouse of a woman was what Harold had chosen, someone who would never challenge him, never stand tall in the mud, never be anything but what his mother approved. "Congratulations on your engagement," Lila said, meaning it. "I hope you'll be very happy." Harold's face flushed. "Well, He seemed to gather himself, and something ugly crept into his expression. "I suppose everyone gets what they deserve in the end. Even scarred goods can find someone willing to overlook certain deficiencies." The words hung in the air like a slap. Around them, conversation stilled as people sensed drama. Lila felt Eli tense beside her, but she touched his arm lightly, stilling whatever response he'd been about to make. "You're right, Mr. Wexler," she said, her voice carrying clear and strong. "Everyone does get what they deserve. You got a woman who'll never overshadow you, and I got my self-respect. I'd say we both came out ahead." She stepped closer, close enough to see the sweat beading on his forehead. "But let me correct one misunderstanding. This isn't a deficiency." She touched her scar deliberately. "It's proof that I've survived worse than your rejection, better scarred and standing than spotless and spineless. Wouldn't you say?" The hall had gone completely quiet now, everyone watching. Harold's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Miss Shaw tugged at his arm, clearly wanting to be anywhere else. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, came the sound of clapping, slow at first, then joined by others. Mrs. Hendricks, whose daughter Lila had stitched, Mrs. Patterson and little Emma, even Mrs. Morrison, looking amused behind her fan. Harold fled, dragging Miss Shaw with him. The music started up again. Conversations resumed. But something had shifted in the air. People looked at Lila differently now, not with pity or curiosity, but with something approaching respect. "That was—" Eli paused, seeming to search for words. "That was magnificent." "That was necessary," Lila corrected, though her hands were shaking slightly. "I won't be anyone's cautionary tale." "Dance with me." The request surprised her. I haven't danced since—" "Since Kansas City? Then it's time." He held out his hand. "Trust me." She did. She realized. Somewhere between that first night in the mud and this moment, she'd learned to trust this quiet man who asked philosophical questions and brought her beautiful leather. The dance was a simple reel, nothing fancy, but Eli led with confidence, and Lila found her feet remembering the steps. Around them, other couples moved in the familiar patterns. And if people stared, well, let 'em. "You know what I think," Eli said as they turned. "What?" "I think Harold Wexler did you the greatest favor of your life." Lila laughed, surprising herself. "How do you figure that?" "If he'd kept his word, you'd be on some ranch right now, trying to please his mother and make yourself smaller every day. Instead, you're here, building something of your own, standing tall." His hand tightened on hers. "I'd say that's worth a train ticket from Kansas City." The dance ended, but Eli didn't release her immediately. They stood there, hands clasped, while around them the social swirled on. "Thank you," Lila said softly. "For the dance, for everything. I'm the one who should be thanking you." At her questioning look, he smiled. "These gloves you made, half the ranch hands have been asking where I got them. Tom Morrison wants a pair, and so does Judge Baker. Seems you might need to add leather work to your services." "I wouldn't know what to charge for such work." "I could help with that. Maybe we could discuss it over dinner sometime. Adelaide's cooking is fine. But there's a woman runs a cafe on 2nd Street who makes the best beef stew this side of the Rockies." Before Lila could answer, A commotion near the door drew their attention. Harold had returned, his face red with drink and wounded pride. He swayed slightly, pointing an accusatory finger at Lila. "You think you're better than me," he slurred. "Coming here, setting up shop, turning the women against me. You're nothing but a scarred—" "That's enough." Eli stepped forward, placing himself between Harold and Lila. His voice was quiet, but carried an edge that made Harold step back. "The lady said her piece. You do well to leave it at that." "Or what you'll defend her honor." Harold laughed uglily. "What honor? She's just another desperate woman who—" The punch came so fast Lila barely saw it. One moment Harold was standing, the next he was on the floor, holding his nose as blood seeped between his fingers. Eli flexed his hand, looking more annoyed than angry. "I warned you to leave it be." The sheriff, old Tom Garrett, pushed through the crowd. He took in the scene with weary eyes, Harold bleeding on the floor, Eli standing over him, Lila pressed against the wall. "Harold Wexler, you're drunk and disorderly," the sheriff announced. "Again. Come on, let's get you home before your mother hears about this." As Harold was hauled away, still muttering threats and complaints, the crowd began to disperse. Some looked scandalized, others approving. Emma Patterson broke free from her mother to run to Lila. "You were so brave," she exclaimed. "The way you stood up to him, and the words you said." "Words are easy," Lila said, smoothing the girl's hair. "It's the standing that's hard." But as she looked around the hall at Adelaide beaming proudly, at Mrs. Morrison nodding approval, at Eli watching her with something warm in his eyes, she realized it had gotten easier, somewhere between thread and needle, between careful stitches and steady hands. She'd found her place. The social continued around them, music and laughter filling the space Harold's ugliness had tried to poison. And when Eli asked her to dance again, Lila said yes, not caring who watched or what they whispered. She was still standing, after all, standing and dancing and finally, truly, beginning to live. The news arrived on a Tuesday evening, carried by young Tom Garrett on a horse lathered with sweat. Lila was finishing the hem on a christening gown when she heard the commotion outside, horses whinnying, men shouting, Adelaide's voice sharp with concern. She set down her needle and stepped onto the porch. A cluster of men had gathered in the street, their faces grave in the lamplight. Tom Garrett, barely 16 and trying to fill his father's sheriff boots, stood at the center. "Eli Rhodes's horse came back without him?" the boy was saying, his voice cracking with youth and worry. "Found it near Miller's Creek, saddle bloody. Looks like he went down the ravine chasing strays." The christening gown slipped from Lila's numb fingers. Around her, the world seemed to tilt and blur, sounds becoming distant and strange. Eli, blood, ravine. The words circled her mind like vultures. "When?" someone asked. "This afternoon. Near as we can figure, the Hendricks boys are out searching, but with the dark and the storm coming—" Tom trailed off, the unspoken fears hanging heavy as wet wool. Lila was moving before she'd made the conscious decision, grabbing her coat and Adelaide's medical supplies. The older woman caught her arm. "Child, what are you thinking?" "I'm going." Lila's voice came out steady, surprising her. "He's out there, hurt, in this cold. I'm going." "The men are searching." "The men don't know what to look for." She thought of Sarah Hendricks' arm, of all the factory accidents she'd seen. "I do. I've seen what blood loss looks like. How hurt people hide. I'm going." Adelaide studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "The Weatherbys have a wagon. They're good people, they'll help." Within minutes, Lila was climbing into Jonas Weatherby's wagon, his wife Martha beside her with blankets and a lantern. The old couple exchanged glances but asked no questions, simply urged their horses into the night. The ride seemed endless. Spring rain had started, cold and stinging, turning the road to soup. Lila huddled between the Weatherbys, Adelaide's medical bag clutched to her chest, trying not to think about Eli lying broken somewhere in the dark. Known Eli since he was a boy, Jonas said suddenly, his voice rough. His PA died when he was 12. Took over the ranch young, made something of it through pure stubbornness. Not the kind of man to die easy. No, Lila agreed, her throat tight. He's not. They reached Miller's Creek as the storm worsened. Other searchers' lanterns bobbed like fireflies in the darkness. Sheriff Garrett himself was there now, organizing the search with military precision. Miss Donovan? He looked surprised. This ain't no place for... Where did they find the horse? She interrupted. Exactly where... He pointed downstream, near that big cottonwood. But we've searched all along here. Lila was already moving, taking a lantern from Martha. She thought about Eli, about the way he noticed things others missed. He wouldn't have just chased strays. He would have had a reason for being here. A plan. The old mine shaft, she said suddenly. Is it near here? Jonas straightened. About a quarter-mile upstream, but that's been boarded up for years. Boards rot. Lila was already heading that direction, ignoring the sheriff's protests. If he was chasing strays and one went toward the mine, the men followed her, their skepticism fading as her certainty grew. The rain made everything treacherous, but Lila pressed on, her skirts heavy with mud, her hands numb on the lantern handle. She heard at first a sound that might have been wind, but wasn't. A low groan, barely audible over the storm. There! She scrambled down the bank, slipping and sliding. Bring ropes. Eli lay wedged between two boulders just above the waterline, his left shoulder at an angle that made her stomach lurch. Blood matted his hair, and his face was pale as winter morning, but his eyes were open, tracking her approach with sluggish recognition. Lila? His voice was barely a whisper. What are you... Hush! She was already assessing the damage, hands moving with practiced efficiency despite their shaking. Save your strength! The men rigged ropes while Lila stabilized Eli as best she could. His shoulder was dislocated, ribs likely cracked, and the head wound bled sluggishly. But his pupils responded to light, and his grip was strong when she gave him her hand. Hurts, he admitted, which worried her more than any amount of stoicism would have. I know. We're getting you out. She kept her voice calm even as fear clawed at her throat. Jonas has his wagon. We'll have you warm soon. The rescue took forever and no time at all. The men hauled Eli up with infinite care, Lila climbing beside him, steadying his injured shoulder. By the time they got him to the wagon, he was barely conscious, mumbling words she couldn't catch. My place is closest, Jonas said, but Lila shook her head. Adelaide's, she'll have everything we need, and I can tend him better there. No one argued. Perhaps they saw something in her face, or perhaps they simply recognized that she'd taken charge and wouldn't be moved. The ride back was a nightmare of careful speed, Lila cradling Eli's head in her lap, monitoring his breathing. Adelaide was ready when they arrived, her kitchen transformed into a makeshift surgery. They laid Eli on the table, and Lila went to work. She'd reset dislocations in the factory. Industrial accidents were rarely kind, with Jonas and Tom holding him steady. She manipulated the shoulder back into place. Eli's scream cut through her like a blade, but the joint slipped home with an audible pop. Good, she murmured, moving to the head wound. That's the worst done. It took 12 stitches to close the gash on his scalp, each one placed with the same precision she'd use on silk. She bound his ribs, cleaned numerous cuts and bruises, all while maintaining a steady stream of soft words meant as much for herself as for him. You came, Eli said at one point, his eyes focusing on her face with effort. Through the storm, you came for me. Of course I came. She smoothed hair back from his forehead, heedless of who was watching. Did you think I wouldn't? Dawn was breaking by the time she finished. The men who'd helped with the rescue had long since departed, leaving just Adelaide and the Weatherbys as witnesses. Eli slept now, his breathing deep and even, the color returning slowly to his face. "He'll need watching," Lila said, swaying on her feet. "The head injury—" "You'll watch him," Adelaide said firmly. "After you've had some rest yourself. Martha, help me get her upstairs before she falls down." "I can't leave him." "You can and will. Jonas will sit with him for a few hours while you sleep. You're no good to him dead on your feet." Lila wanted to argue but couldn't find the strength. She let herself be led upstairs, out of her ruined dress and into bed. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Eli lying broken in the ravine, heard his scream when she'd reset his shoulder. After 2 hours of restless dozing, she gave up and crept back downstairs. Jonas sat by Eli's pallet, whittling quietly. "How is he?" Stirred a few times, asked for you. The old man's eyes were knowing. "I'll leave you to it." Lila took his place, studying Eli's face in the morning light. The bruising was spectacular now, purple and green painting one side of his face, but his breathing was steady, and when she checked his pupils, they responded normally. She was changing the bandage on his head when he woke fully, his hand catching hers. "You found me." His voice was rough but coherent. "How did you know where to look?" "I thought like you," she said simply. "Asked myself where a smart man would go if he was chasing strays near a dangerous creek." The mine made sense. "You risked yourself. In the storm. In the dark. You would have done the same." She finished the bandage, trying for briskness. "Besides, I couldn't let my best leather goods customer die. Bad for business." He laughed, then winced as it pulled his ribs. "Practical. I like that about you." "Among other things." The words slipped out before she could stop them. His hand found hers again, thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "Among many things, your strength, your refusal to be small, the way you see people for who they are, not what they look like." He paused. "If I asked, would you stay beyond healing?" The echo of his words from the church social made her breath catch. "Are you asking?" "I'm saying that when a woman risks her life to find you, tends your wounds, and watches over you through the night, a man ought to pay attention. I'm saying that I've been paying attention since the night you stood tall in the mud." His grip tightened. "I'm saying yes. I'm asking." Lila looked at this man who'd seen her scar and seen her worth in the same glance, who'd asked her questions that made her think, who'd brought her leather and philosophical challenges in equal measure, who'd defended her honor with his fists and trusted her courage with his life. "Then I'm saying yes," she whispered. "I'll stay." Adelaide found them like that an hour later, hands clasped, both asleep in the morning sun. She smiled, covered them both with a quilt, and went to make breakfast. The town could wait for its gossip. Right now, there was healing happening, and not just of the body. Sometimes the best stories were the ones that began with endings of failed mail-order marriage, a fall from a horse, a woman who refused to be measured by her scars. Sometimes you had to break before you could heal stronger. And sometimes, Adelaide thought, stirring eggs and humming, sometimes you found exactly where you belonged by getting thoroughly lost first. Recovery came slowly, measured in small victories. The first day Eli could sit up without the room spinning. The third day he could stand, though his ribs protested every breath. By the end of the week, he was restless as a caged wolf, trying to convince anyone who'd listen that he was well enough to return to his ranch. "The horses need tending," he argued for the 10th time, watching Lila change his bandages with practiced hands. "The spring foals are due any day. Your foreman is perfectly capable." Lila interrupted, not looking up from her work. "Jonas rode out yesterday. Everything's in hand." But nothing." She secured the last bandage, finally meeting his eyes. "You nearly died." "Eli Rhodes, a week's rest won't kill you, though the stubbornness might." He caught her hand as she turned away. "Stay. Talk to me. I'm going mad with only my thoughts for company." She hesitated, then settled into the chair beside his bed. They'd developed this routine over the past days. She would work on her sewing while he dozed or they talked. The conversations ranged from childhood memories to dreams for the future, each revelation weaving them closer together. "What are you working on?" he asked, gesturing to the fabric in her basket. "A wedding dress." She spread the delicate material for him to see. "Miss Palmer is marrying the schoolteacher next month. She wants something simple but elegant." "It's beautiful. Like you." The words hung in the air between them. Since that morning when she'd agreed to stay, they'd danced around the deeper meaning of that promise. Now, with afternoon sun slanting through Adelaide's lace curtains, the unspoken things seemed to demand attention. "Eli?" "I mean it." He shifted, wincing slightly but determined. "I've been lying here for days, watching you work. The way the light catches your hair, how you bite your lip when you're concentrating, the little smile when you get a stitch just right." He paused. "I've been thinking about how empty my house is going to feel when I go back." Lila set aside her sewing, her heart racing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm a fool for taking this long to speak plain." He sat up straighter, ignoring his body's protests. "I'm saying that I want you to come to the ranch, not as my nurse or my seamstress, but as my wife, if you'll have me." The front door slammed open before Lila could respond. Tom Garrett stood there, hat askew, face flushed with urgency. "Miss Donovan, we need you. There's been an accident at the mine cave-in. Doc Morrison's already there, but he sent for you, specific. Said you've got the steady hands he needs." Lila was already reaching for Adelaide's medical bag. "How many hurt?" "6 trapped, 3 already out. It's bad, miss." She turned to Eli, torn between duty and the conversation they'd been having. He waved her away. "Go. They need you. We'll finish this later." The ride to the mine was a blur of dust and urgency. The usually quiet site swarmed with activity men hauling timber for supports, women organizing blankets and water. Children kept carefully back from the danger. "Doctor," Morrison met her at the entrance, his usually pristine appearance disheveled with coal dust and blood. "Thank God. I've got one man needs stitching I can't manage, my hands aren't what they were, and another with a crushed hand that needs delicate work." They worked side by side through the afternoon and into evening. Lila's factory experience served her well. She'd seen industrial accidents, knew how to stay calm when others panicked. Her fingers moved swift and sure, stitching wounds, setting bones, offering quiet comfort to scared miners. "You've got a gift, Doctor," Morrison said as they took a brief rest between patients. "Ever think about formal training? There's a school in Denver that takes women now." "I'm just a seamstress who's good with a needle." Lila demurred. "You're more than that." He watched her clean a particularly nasty gash with steady hands. "Think about it. Town could use another pair of healing hands." It was near midnight when the last patient was tended. Lila emerged from the mine office to find a crowd still gathered. Despite the late hour, among them, leaning heavily on a crutch, stood Eli. "You shouldn't be here," she said, hurrying to his side. "Couldn't stay away. Heard you were amazing." He smiled at her coal-smudged face. "Though that's nothing new." "Eli Rhodes, you fool!" "Let the man speak," someone called out. Lila realized they'd drawn an audience, miners and townspeople forming a loose circle around them. Eli straightened, seeming to draw strength from somewhere deep. "Earlier today, I asked this woman something important, got interrupted before she could answer." He looked directly at Lila. "Figure I might as well ask again, with witnesses this time." "Eli, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." He balanced on his crutch, reaching into his pocket. "Lila Donovan, you saved my life twice over. Once from that ravine, and once from an empty existence I didn't even know I was living. You see the best in people, work miracles with your hands, and stand taller than anyone I know. He pulled out something that caught the lantern light, a ring. Simple but elegant, clearly old and cherished. This was my mother's. Been waiting 20 years for a woman worthy of wearing it. I'm hoping that woman is you. The crowd had gone completely silent. Lila stood frozen, acutely aware of her appearance covered in coal dust and blood, hair escaping its pins, exhausted from hours of medical work. Not exactly how she'd imagined a proposal. But then, nothing about her journey to Dustwood had gone as imagined. "I'm scarred," she said quietly, though everyone could hear. "That won't change." "Thank God for that." Eli replied immediately. "Your scars are part of your story. They're proof you survived, that you're stronger than whatever tried to break you." He shifted closer, his voice dropping. "I've got scars too. Lila, some you can see, some you can't. Maybe that's why I recognized a kindred spirit that first night. The town will talk. They'll say you could have done better." "The town can hang. I couldn't do better than a woman who runs into storms to save others, who sees a hurt child and helps without hesitation, who stands up to bullies and refuses to be small." He held out the ring. "So I'm asking again. In front of God and half of Dustwood, will you marry me?" Lila looked around the circle of faces. She saw Adelaide beaming like a proud mother, the Weatherbys nodding encouragement, Mrs. Morrison actually dabbing at her eyes, Dr. Morrison smiling approval. Even some of the miners, men she'd just spent hours patching up, were grinning through their exhaustion. Then she looked at Eli, bruised, battered, standing on one leg, offering his heart in front of everyone. "You realize," she said slowly, "that if I say yes, you're stuck with me, scar and all. I'm counting on it. And I'll keep working, sewing, maybe even what Dr. Morrison suggested. I'd be proud to have a wife who heals people. And you'll have to put up with my stubbornness." "Woman, will you marry me or not?" His voice broke slightly. "My ribs are killing me and this crutch is digging into my arm, but I'll stand here all night if I have to." Lila laughed, surprising herself with the joy that bubbled up from somewhere deep. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." The crowd erupted. Cheers, applause. Someone starting an impromptu jig despite the late hour and recent tragedy. Eli swayed, and Lila quickly moved to support him, letting him lean on her instead of the crutch. "About time," he murmured against her hair. "Thought you were going to leave me standing here forever." "Never," she promised, meaning it. "Though we are going back to Adelaide's right now before you fall over and undo all my careful nursing." As they made their slow way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and good wishes, Lila marveled at the turn her life had taken. She'd come to Dustwood expecting to be a rancher's wife, hidden away on some remote property, tolerated despite her scar. Instead, she'd found a community that valued her skills, a man who saw her strength as beautiful, and a future bright with possibility. Tomorrow there would be plans to make, a ranch to visit, a life to build together. But tonight, walking through the dusty streets with Eli's weight warm against her side and his mother's ring on her finger, Lila Donovan allowed herself a moment of pure happiness. She'd been rejected at a train station, the best thing that ever happened to her. She'd stood tall in the mud and found that others would stand with her. And now, covered in coal dust and medical supplies, exhausted but exhilarated, she was going home. Not to Adelaide's boarding house, though that dear woman had given her shelter when she needed it most, but home to the life she'd chosen, the man who'd chosen her, and the future they'd build with scarred hands and whole hearts. Behind them, the mine continued its recovery work. Ahead, Adelaide's windows glowed with welcoming light, and somewhere between the darkness and the dawn, a seamstress and a horseman had found their way to each other. It was, Lila thought, a very good story, the kind worth telling on winter nights, when children asked how their grandparents met and why Grandma's ring was worn smooth with loving. But that was for later. For now, There was just the mountain stars, the man beside her, and the certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. The town meeting was called for a Thursday evening in late April, when the mud had finally dried and the first wildflowers dotted the hills. Lila sat beside Eli in the crowded church hall, aware of the tension that crackled through the air like lightning before a storm. At the front of the room, Mayor Hutchins cleared his throat nervously. Beside him stood two men in city suits, their polished shoes and clean hands marking them as outsiders as clearly as if they'd worn signs. "Folks, these gentlemen represent the Mountain West Mining Consortium," the mayor began. "They've come with a proposition regarding the land west of town, the grazing lands many of you use." One of the suited men stepped forward. A smile stretched across his face like paint. "Good evening. I'm Mr. Cornelius Blackwood, and this is my associate, Mr. Harrington. We're here to offer your community an opportunity for prosperity." A murmur ran through the crowd. Lila felt Eli tense beside her, his hand tightening on his cane. He was walking now, though still careful of his healing ribs. "The consortium wishes to purchase the grazing rights to 8,000 acres, Blackwood continued. "We're prepared to offer a substantial sum enough to transform Dustwood into a thriving metropolis." "What do you want with grazing land?" called out Jonas Weatherby from the back. Blackwood's smile widened. "Recent surveys suggest significant mineral deposits beneath that land. Coal, certainly. Perhaps silver. The consortium would bring jobs, prosperity, a railroad spur." "And destroy the range," Eli said, his voice cutting through the growing chatter. He stood slowly, commanding attention. 8,000 acres is half the grazing land in this valley. You take that, you kill the ranches. No ranches, no Dustwood. Progress demands sacrifice, Mr. Rhodes, and progress that destroys what it claims to improve isn't progress at all." Blackwood's expression hardened. "The town council has the authority to make this decision. Individual ranchers need not—" "Individual ranchers vote for the town council," Adelaide interjected from her seat. "And we've got a say in what happens to our home." The meeting erupted into arguments. Some saw dollar signs and dreams of prosperity. Others, like Eli and the established ranchers, saw disaster. Lila listened to the competing voices, her mind working. "May I speak?" She stood, her clear voice somehow cutting through the noise. Mayor Hutchins looked relieved to have any interruption. "The floor recognizes Miss Donovan." "Mrs. Rhodes, as of next month," Eli corrected with a slight smile. "Miss Donovan for now," Lila said, moving to the front. "Mr. Blackwood, you speak of prosperity. Tell me, what happened in Copper Falls after your consortium arrived?" Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "I'm not familiar." "No." Lila pulled a newspaper from her bag. "The Denver Post says different. Says Copper Falls went from thriving cattle town to ghost town in 3 years. After the minerals ran out and the water was fouled, nothing would grow. Nothing could live." "Isolated incident," Harrington said quickly. "Modern methods?" "Modern methods like the ones that caused the cave-in at Miller's Creek Mine last week." "Doctor." Morrison stood now, his authority adding weight to his words. 6 men nearly died. Would've, if Miss Donovan hadn't helped to patch them up. "She's not even from here." Someone called out. Lila couldn't see who. "What does she know about our town?" Lila touched her scar unconsciously, then dropped her hand. "You're right. I've only been here 3 months. I came as a stranger, stood on that platform with nothing but hope and a broken promise." She looked around the room, meeting eyes. "But this town gave me a chance. Adelaide gave me shelter. People like the Weatherbys, the Hendricks, even Mrs. Morrison, you gave me work, respect, a place to belong." She turned back to the crowd. "I may not have been born here, but I've bled for this place. I've stitched your wounds, sewn your clothes, held your hands through hard times. And I'm telling you now, selling to these men would be like selling your own hearts for coins." "Pretty words," Blackwood said dismissively. "But sentiment doesn't pay bills or feed families." "No," Eli agreed, joining Lila at the front. "Hard work does that, sustainable work that lasts generations, not 3 years of boom before bust." He addressed the crowd. "How many of you have fathers, grandfathers buried in this valley? How many want your children to have the same chance to build something lasting?" The tide was turning. Lila could feel it. But Blackwood had one more card to play. "The consortium has already secured certain agreements," he said smoothly. "Several prominent citizens see the wisdom of our offer, including Mr. Harold Wexler, who owns significant acreage." Harold stood from his seat, his fiancée nowhere in sight. "It's true. I've given preliminary agreement. The money they're offering—" He looked around defensively. "We'd be fools to refuse." "We'd be bigger fools to accept," growled Jonas Weatherby. "Eli's right. No grazing land, no cattle, no town. Just another mining camp that'll blow away when the earth's been hollowed out." The arguing resumed, louder than before. Mayor Hutchins banged his gavel futilely. Lila noticed several townspeople slipping out, faces troubled. The community was fracturing before her eyes. "Stop!" she said, but her voice was lost. She tried again, louder. "Stop!" When that didn't work, she did something that surprised even herself. She whistled sharp and piercing, the way her father had taught her to call horses. The hall fell silent in shock. "Thank you," she said calmly. "Now, Mr. Blackwood says sentiment doesn't pay bills. He's wrong, Mrs. Patterson. Didn't sentiment lead you to commission those curtains that helped you beautify the store? Drawing more customers, Mr. Hendricks. Wasn't it sentiment that made neighbors come help with your harvest when you broke your leg? Saving your season." She walked among them now, her voice growing stronger. "Every mended shirt, every shared meal, every helping hand that sentiment turned into survival. That's what builds a town that lasts." "The young lady makes a point," said Judge Baker, speaking for the first time. "But we need facts, not just feelings. Mr. Rhodes, you ranch these lands. Tell us plain, can the ranches survive without those 8,000 acres? Eli shook his head. "Not long term. We rotate grazing to let the land recover. Take half that away. We'll overgraze what's left inside 2 seasons. Then nothing survives." "So we have a choice," the judge continued. "Quick money that destroys our future, or keeping what we have and finding another way forward." "There is another way." "Doctor," Morrison said. "Miss Donovan, soon to be Mrs. Rhodes, has shown us she came with nothing and built something through skill and determination. Maybe instead of selling our souls to outsiders, we should be investing in ourselves." "Easy for you to say," Harold sneered. "You're not facing bankruptcy." "Neither are you if you'd stop gambling in Denver," someone called out, earning nervous laughter. Mayor Hutchins finally restored order. "We'll put it to a vote, all in favor of accepting the consortium's offer." A scattering of hands rose, Harold's most prominent among them, along with a few others who saw only the immediate profit. All opposed. The rest of the room raised their hands. Ranchers, shopkeepers, workers, wives. Even some who'd wavered earlier, swayed by the evening's arguments. "The measure fails," the mayor announced. "Dustwood declines the consortium's offer." Blackwood's face darkened. "You're making a mistake. Progress won't be stopped. We'll be back with better terms or better tactics. And we'll be here," Eli said simply, still standing. The meeting broke up in clusters of conversation. Some gathered around Harold, arguing in low voices. Others surrounded Eli and Lila, offering thanks and support. "That was brave, Mrs." Morrison said, stopping beside Lila. "Speaking up like that, reminding us what matters." "Just returning the favor," Lila replied. "This town stood up for me first." Outside, the evening air was cool and sweet with spring. Eli walked beside her, their pace slow but steady. "You were magnificent in there," he said, "that whistle especially." Lila laughed. "My mother would be horrified. Ladies don't whistle." "Good thing you're more than just a lady, then." He stopped, turning to face her. "You know Blackwood was right about one thing. They'll be back. Men like that don't give up easy. Then we'll face them again, together." She took his arm, feeling the solid strength of him. "That's what standing tall means, isn't it? Not just once, but every time it matters." They walked on, past the shops and houses of the town they'd fought to preserve. Behind them, the church hall finally emptied. But the echoes of the evening would last much longer. A community had been tested and held. A woman who'd arrived as a rejected stranger had helped save the home that had saved her. And somewhere in the distance, a train whistle sounded, not bringing false promises this time, but carrying away two frustrated city men and their briefcases full of contracts that would never be signed. Dustwood would survive another day, another season, another generation. Not through selling its soul, but through the simple, powerful act of people standing together, scarred but unbroken, rooted in land and loyalty that money couldn't buy. It was, Lila thought, worth more than all the silver hidden in the mountains, and certainly worth fighting for, as many times as necessary. The evening was perfect for sitting on Adelaide's porch, warm enough to be comfortable, cool enough to keep the mosquitoes at bay. Lila sat beside Eli on the worn wooden bench, their hands intertwined, watching the sun paint the mountains gold and crimson. Tomorrow would bring their wedding, but tonight was for quiet reflection. "Never thought my first night in Dustwood would lead here," Lila said softly, her fingers tracing the calluses on Eli's palm. "I was so certain it would end in silence, alone in some stranger's house." "Harold's house," Eli corrected with a wry smile. "With his mother watching your every move, finding fault with how you breathe. A narrow escape indeed." She leaned against his shoulder, solid and warm. Though I wouldn't call Adelaide's boarding house silence exactly, not with her tendency to appear with tea and wisdom at all hours. From inside came the clatter of pans Adelaide preparing for tomorrow's wedding feast. Half the town had volunteered to help, bringing food, flowers, and genuine joy for the couple who'd helped save their home from the mining consortium. "Penny for your thoughts?" Eli asked, noticing her distant expression. "Just remembering. That first night, standing on the platform, I thought I'd lost everything, my future, my hopes, my last dollar spent on a train ticket to nowhere." She touched her scar absently. "I thought this mark had finally cost me too much. And now I know it saved me." She turned to face him fully. "If Harold had kept his word, I'd be on some isolated ranch, trying to make myself smaller every day. Instead, I found work that matters, people who see me for who I am, and—" she smiled, "and a man who asks the right questions." Speaking of questions, Eli shifted, reaching into his pocket. "I have one more. We're getting married tomorrow. Eli, bit late for new questions." "This one's important." He pulled out a small wrapped package. "What do you think of this?" Lila unwrapped it carefully, revealing a leather journal, beautifully tooled with mountains and stars, the same pattern she'd embroidered on his gloves months ago. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the design. "Open it." Inside the front cover, in Eli's careful hand, were words that made her throat tight. "For the woman who stands tall, may you fill these pages with all the lives you've mended, all the people you've helped, all the ways you've made Dustwood home. Your story matters. Your scars are beautiful. Your heart is brave. Your devoted husband tomorrow. Eli." "I thought," he said quietly, "you might want to keep track of the sewing, the doctoring, the speeches that save towns, all of it." Lila clutched the journal, eyes stinging. "You want me to write our story?" "Your story?" which happens to include a fool horseman who was smart enough to recognize gold when he saw it, even if it came with a scar and an attitude. She laughed, wiping her eyes. Such romance. How could a girl resist? The porch door opened, and Adelaide emerged with corn cakes and her special honey butter. Thought you two might need sustenance. Big day tomorrow. She settled into her rocking chair, the three of them falling into comfortable silence. The town spread below them, peaceful in the twilight. Smoke rose from chimneys, families gathering for evening meals. Somewhere, a fiddle played a wandering tune. I have something to tell you both, Adelaide said eventually. Been waiting for the right moment. They turned to her, curious. Samuel, my late husband, he owned this house clear. No debts, no liens. When he died, he left it to me with instructions. She smiled at Lila. He said to use it to help women who needed shelter. Women who'd been left or lost or just needed a place to find their feet again. You've done that beautifully, Lila said. I have, but I'm getting older, and this place needs younger hands. Steadier hands. She looked between them. I want you to have it. As a wedding gift. Adelaide, we couldn't, Eli began. You can and will. Her tone brooked no argument. You'll need a place in town, especially with Lila's work. The ranch is too far for daily trips. Keep this as your town residence, and I'll take the small room downstairs. Still my home, but your house deal. Lila stood and embraced the older woman, both of them crying now. You saved me, she whispered. That first night. You saved yourself, Adelaide corrected firmly. I just provided the soup and shelter. You did the standing. Later, after Adelaide had retired and the stars had emerged in full glory, Eli and Lila remained on the porch. The journal lay open in her lap, its blank pages full of promise. What will you write first? Eli asked. Lila considered, then picked up the pen Adelaide had thoughtfully provided. In careful letters, she began. She thought her first night would end in silence, but it didn't. Not in Dustwood, where even strangers can become family, where scars become symbols of strength, where standing tall means standing together. She paused, then continued. My name is Lila Donovan, soon to be Rhodes. I came to this town as a mail-order bride, rejected at first sight, but that rejection became my liberation. In losing what I thought I wanted, I found what I truly needed, work that fulfills me, people who value me, and love that sees beauty where others saw only damage. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of spring flowers and possibility. Tomorrow would bring vows and celebration, the formal joining of two lives already intertwined. But tonight was theirs alone, a scarred woman and a horseman who asked the right questions, sitting on a porch that would soon be theirs, in a town they'd helped save. Read it to me, Eli requested, what you've written. So she did, her voice steady and sure in the darkness. And when she finished, he took the pen and added his own words. The cowboy looked into her eyes and saw forever, not despite the scar, but because of everything it represented: survival, strength, and the courage to keep standing when the world tries to knock you down. He was smart enough to recognize home when he found it, wise enough to know that some people are worth waiting for, and lucky enough that she said yes. They sat together as the night deepened, the journal between them, their future spread out like the stars above. In the morning, the church bells would ring, the town would gather, and two lives would officially become one. But here, now, in the quiet of Adelaide's porch with corn cake crumbs on the plate and promises written in leather-bound pages, Lila Donovan knew the truth. Her first night in Dustwood hadn't ended in silence at all. It had ended with the beginning of everything. The wind stirred the pages of the journal, and she closed it carefully, preserving their words. Tomorrow she would wear Adelaide's wedding dress, altered to fit perfectly. Eli would stand steady despite his still healing ribs. The town would celebrate love born from rejection, hope rising from disappointment. And years from now, when their children asked how they met, Lila would show them this journal, these first words written on the eve of their wedding. She would tell them about standing tall in the mud, about choosing courage over comfort, about how the best stories often begin with the worst moments. But that was for the future. Tonight, she simply sat with the man she loved, in the town that had become home, grateful for every twisted turn that had brought her here. The stars wheeled overhead, constant and bright, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle sounded, not an ending this time, but a reminder of beginnings, of journeys that led to exactly where you needed to be. "No regrets?" Eli asked softly. "Not one," Lila answered, and meant it. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the mountains and the church bells rang out their joy, a seamstress and a horseman would pledge their lives to each other, witnessed by a town that knew how to value what truly mattered. It would be, everyone agreed, the finest wedding Dustwood had ever seen. But that's a story for tomorrow. Tonight was for corn cakes and quiet promises, for journals and gentle touches, for two people who'd found each other against all odds and chosen to stand tall together. It was more than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I'd love to know where in the world you're enjoying this tale. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Lila and Eli's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more people discover this heartwarming frontier romance. Your support means everything, and I can't wait to share more authentic Western tales with you.